Hi, Katie here again. So today I wanted to talk about what I didn't cover in my last vlog update. Just checking my cameras on. So yeah, I want to cover today what I didn't cover in my last vlog update, which was J.K. Rowling's infamous new book, Troubled Waters, and also something that's happened since then about I think it was the World Rugby decision to ban trans women from playing international rugby. So I mean, let's have a look at J.K. Rowling's book first of all. I mean, that was published back a couple of weeks ago, and it's called Troubled Waters, and she's written it under the pen name of Robert Galbraith, which in itself is problematic because I believe Robert Galbraith was a doctor in the 1950s in the USA who actually practiced and preached conversion therapy towards LGBT people. So, I mean, why she should pick that name and then write something about a cross-dressing killer, a man who cross-dresses as a woman, I kind of, it seems too much of a coincidence really for it not to be deliberate, which would make one wonder how transphobic she is, because when she started off, she seemed to just be dabbling in it. But anyway, the trope of the transgender killer, or the transphobic trope of the transgender killer, that is so, that's such a stereotype. And I mean, it seems to have started off back around 1960 with the movie Psycho, by Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock, even. I don't know why I'm talking like this. But Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho featured a man who dressed up as his mother and murdered young women. So, I mean, that, and then there was another one called Dress to Kill, where Michael Caine actually played a transvestite who went around murdering women. And there have been several other movies as well and books featuring um, transgender killers, transgender people who go around murdering cis people. And actually, as we all know, that has no basis in reality, because actually trans people are way more likely to be murdered by cis people than the other way around. Um, News stories every day bear this out. I mean, and one of the things that actually really kind of made me angry was the fact that J.K. Rowling's book actually came out the same week that an American man, a US Marine, was pardoned in the Philippines for murdering a Filipino trans woman. Now, all the attention was on J.K. Rowling's book, and with people saying, "Oh well, you've got to be, she's, you've got to be nice to her. It's her opinion. Everybody's trying to silence her. They're accusing her of being transphobic, etc., etc." And and this was the big news item, and there were numerous articles in papers, especially in the UK, about this. And I'm going to take a sip of water. So I'm feeling a bit groggy today, actually. Um, yeah, there were numerous articles, online and in the sort of mainstream media about the persecution of J.K. Rowling, but actually, she's not being persecuted, and people have just called her out on the transphobia, and then, like, the majority of articles in the paper were, supportive of her because we have a transphobic press over here in the UK, and it seems mainstream media establishment. But anyway, the same week all this was going on, and the spotlight was on J.K. Rowling, saying, "Oh, poor J.K. Rowling," and all this. How can she manage with all this hate directed towards her? That very same week, a man was released well, he didn't even go to prison. A man was released from custody in the Philippines, an American man, who actually murdered a trans woman. He was actually pardoned by the president, President Duterte, who's a bit of a twat anyway, because basically he's a Trump wannabe. But I mean, what happened was this American Marine stationed in the Philippines a couple of years ago went out on a date with a woman, and when they got back to a hotel room together, when they started to have sex, he says that it was only then he discovered she was trans, so he murdered her. And the poor woman's name was Jennifer Lord. She was only 19. She was a teenager. So anyway, he murdered the teenage trans girl. He got trial he was initially charged with murder, but that was downgraded to homicide. That was downgraded, sorry, to manslaughter because of the fact that literally because of the fact that his victim was trans. So his argument in court was that he'd gone to have sex with this young woman and then discovered she was trans, and that's why he beat her to death, because he was both angry and he, quote unquote, felt like he'd been raped. Because when he felt like he'd been raped and he murdered this poor 19-year-old trans woman, he brutally murdered her. And I mean, we've only got his word for what happened there. He might as well have, the sex might have been non-consensual as well, and he might have raped her, but we don't know. But and yeah, so the court decided to downgrade the charges to manslaughter, because he basically played what was called the old gay panic defence. And even though neither of them were gay, this was a trans woman, heterosexual trans woman, and he didn't even get sent to prison. Because in the Philippines, because the American troops are stationed there, there's like some kind of special agreement whereby if an American soldier or sailor or whatever does anything wrong over there, then they don't get put in a Filipino prison. They get detained by the US military. And this guy, he basically never went to prison. I think he was like detained on base for about 2 or 3 years, and he obviously had access to all other things, comforts like I guess television and phone calls, and stuff with his you know relatives, the internet and stuff. And I mean, like, to think of that, maybe he even had access to looking at porn. Perhaps he was looking at trans porn and deciding, fantasizing about who the next poor trans girl he was going to target would be. Yeah. So anyway, to cut a long story short, or it's not a very long story because he didn't even spend time in real jail. He actually, President Duterte of the Philippines, who is a Trump wannabe, he actually pardoned this guy. And this was a couple of weeks ago, the same week that J.K. Rowling's book was published. And he made an official announcement, which has all been I think you can find it on YouTube and like various news channels. And in the video, he pardoned this American Marine, and he didn't even mention the name of the victim. He didn't even mention the name of the Filipino victim, whose name was Jennifer Lord. And he didn't even mention her name, and she was murdered by this guy. I mean, and that's that. So he's got off completely free. I don't know, perhaps he's even in the US Marine Corps. Um, and yeah, and that's it. So nobody, and none of the press covered this at all. They only covered it in passing, but there were no sort of there was no stream of articles about this poor woman and this miscarriage of justice. And yeah, so basically that happened, and I think all that was due to not only transphobia but also racism as well, and the American imperialism. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not saying like all Americans are, troops over there are bad, but this particular thing I think is very unfair. If you commit a crime in somebody else's country, then you should kind of be imprisoned by their laws. There shouldn't be any special agreement because you happen to be a foreigner or a Westerner or whatever. So yeah, and also, yeah, so I was quite, it just kind of highlights the injustice of the way things are at the moment, the kind of one-sidedness about the way that trans issues are reported um, or not reported. So yeah, and the other thing I wanted to talk about was the World Rugby organisation's ban on transgender women playing rugby. I think that happened about 2 weeks ago, or literally this time last week. So yeah, now this is another thing where the well-being and opinions of trans people haven't even been taken into account. So World Rugby said, on advice from groups like Fair Play for Women, who are basically transphobic turf groups, the World Rugby Federation, or whatever they call themselves, because I don't follow any of that kind of sporting stuff, it just doesn't interest me. They decided that trans women should be banned from playing women's rugby because we have an advantage because of our we're taller, which is kind of a laugh really, because I'm one of the shortest people in the world. Well, quite short anyway. But and also because we still have a sort of muscle frame we developed from going through male puberty. Well, actually, for starters, a lot of trans women these days don't even go through male puberty because they are on puberty blockers and they transition at age, sort of 18. So, so their puberty is literally, they go from like a delayed puberty, so they don't develop a masculine frame. And also, as well, I mean, even though our testosterone levels are like way lower than most cis women's testosterone levels, um, trans women are still allowed to play rugby in the men's teams. So now that's what I don't understand. I don't understand how, if this is all supposed to be about health and safety rather than blatant transphobia, why on earth, right, World Rugby still allowing trans women to play on men's teams, with cisgender men specifically? Why? And they're also allowing transgender men to play with cisgender men as well. So, like, all their arguments about it being to do with health and safety completely fall flat, because otherwise they would have banned, sort of trans women. They would have sort of said, well, a trans woman loses body mass, and after a couple of months of HRT, and we're simply not as physically strong as men. We don't have as much upper body strength as men, or lower body strength, from what I've heard. So yet they're still saying that it's safe for trans women to play rugby with cisgender men. So obviously, and then they're still saying it's safe for transgender men to play rugby with cisgender men or cisgender women. So obviously, they never took the well-being of transgender people into account. If it's to do with health and safety, then surely it would be about trans players' health and safety as well. But no, obviously it's not. So it's about transphobia, basically. And it's about the good old boys who run World Rugby, you know, they're quite right-wing, I've heard, particularly in in England, maybe not so much in Wales, but particularly in England, rugby is seen as a kind of establishment thing, you know, a sort of right-wing kind of conservative sort of definer of masculinity, you know, alpha masculinity, and so yeah, so I think that's where it all comes from, you know, and well, as as an aside, I when I was at school, we had to play rugby. It was compulsory. It's not. I didn't go to a. In England, it's compulsory in kind of like public schools and private schools. You know, the posh schools, boys have to play rugby. Again, it's seen as the game for the alpha male leaders. You know, to prepare them to lead the country type thing. It's been seen that way since the time of the Victorian times, and since it was invented, and because it's actually invented Rugby School, I believe, which is a really sort of expensive private school in the UK. And so yeah, when I played rugby, because it was compulsory for all the boys, including me, because in those days I didn't get a, you know, they didn't care if I was a transgender girl. I had to play, you know, I had to still had to play, you know, sport with boys, and yeah, so I had to play rugby at school, and so what happened was the teacher could obviously see that I couldn't play rugby with the boys at school. So what he did was he put me on the far sort of touch line, where I was completely out of harm's way, but also out of any sort of, you know, also where I didn't have any chance to actually participate in the game, apart from jumping up and down on, you know, and to keep myself warm. So literally rugby lessons at school for me, were just kind of going right over to the far end of the field where nobody could hardly even see me, you know, and just staying there, you know, and not causing a fuss. And anyway, well, one day, the rugby ball happened to come to me by some kind of fluke, and I picked it up, and I didn't know what to do. The boys were all at the far end of the field, so I just kind of picked it up, and I walked over the try line with it, and I put it over the try line where those little kind of like thingies are, those posts, whatever they are, you know. So they all just looked at me in astonishment, because nobody even bothered to tackle me. They just looked in astonishment, like I kind of, you know, sort of interfered with their game. And so they just sort of, I scored this try, and one of the boys was like, "Ah, you know, well done," you know, and I think he actually offered me a sweet, you know, and that was it, you know. And the teacher was like, okay, well done," you know. So that was my kind of experience of playing sports at school. Um, I have no interest in sport whatsoever. Maybe that's because I naturally don't have any interest in sport. But now, say if I had interest in sport, you know, if I had been like a girl who, a young trans girl who kind of had potential playing rugby or potential playing football, whatever, then that, you know, to be told that you can't play, you know, you can't compete at elite sort of levels would be like a disincentive, and you know, somebody with real talent could just kind of give up, and that would be such a pity. So yeah, so that was basically what I wanted to say. Really, I can't, you know, I can't think of anything else I want to say today. So yeah, I've been a bit down actually, but I won't go into that. You know, I haven't slept very well this past week or weekend. So yeah, so that's all I want to say. So please do tell me if you have any thoughts on the J.K. Rowling book, Troubled Waters, or you have any thoughts on World Rugby's decision to ban trans women from playing. Um, so please leave feedback down below in the comments. Thank you to all my subscribers and all the new subscribers I've had as well. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching, and I love you all. So, bye, cheerio.